Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, we'll be talking about Antonio Gramsci's The Formation of the Intellectuals. So buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a really fun ride. As always, if any questions arise for you or anything you want to talk about, please feel free to contact me via email or Zoom. Try to do it before your discussion boards and essays are due, so that way any clarification that you need, we can attack that ASAP. But even after is fine too. I like talking about this stuff, so whenever you want to discuss it is totally cool with me. All right, I'm going to take it to the share screen and then put it on the PowerPoint. So here we go. So Antonio Gramsci, Italian guy, lived in the early, born in the late 19th century, but lived really at the time, at such a scary and fascinating time in history, kind of like what we're living right now. But he was an Italian, saw the rise of the capitalist fascists under Mussolini, was very vehemently and vocally against it, led to his incarceration. He wrote a lot of his theoretical essays from prison, actually. And so he's kind of looking at the world from that lens. And so if we think about how that might apply to our contemporary culture, a lot of applications can abound, right? But let's talk Gramsci first. Okay, so first we have this notion of hegemony, right? Hegemony. And hegemony is what the dominant group exercises throughout society, from the overarching power of the ruling class enacted in and among itself, all the way to the subordinate classes and even to the subalterns, right? And actually, subaltern, the term that Gayatri Spivak sort of made famous, and we always attribute to her, subalternity was a notion from Gramsci. A lot of people like Spivak and Baba and Said were influenced heavily by Gramsci's writing. So so hegemony, right? It's sort of like the power of the dominant class that serves the dominant class, but is enacted on everyone, right? Um, and we have cultural hegemony, which implies spontaneous consent of the masses. Again, it only implies consent because a lot of this consent is heavily influenced by those who have power, right? And those seeking to maintain power. Those are two different things, right? If we think about our culture, right? Like think about who has power and then think about all the people who want to maintain that status quo of power. It's not necessarily the same people. Some of the people who want to maintain the status quo are the very ones getting most heavily screwed by the power structure. But I move on. I digress. And so most of the power that is exercised is through cultural hegemony, is through this spontaneous consent, right? When that fails, state coercive power is exercised, right? Um, so in all of these instances, we're talking about how the power is flexed in a given society, right? And you have this like little comic here that I found, right? Like, poor people are just stupid or lazy. War brings peace, right? Like, and then only shopping makes you happy. Like all these sort of like cultural messages that we get that we internalize and absorb, and then we go, oh, well, I'm a little kid. I want to play. Or I'm an adult person, right? Like I want to play violent video games, and not realizing that those are like sort of, continuing this culturally hegemonic idea of like perpetuating war, constant war, and all those things, right? Or like, oh, I'm a woman and I don't feel very attractive. I'm going to constantly mutilate and diminish my body, right? So that I can fit into some culturally hegemonic ideal of what it means to be a woman, right? All these sorts of things, right? Anyway, I digress. Um, Well, then we have intellectuals. Within this culturally hegemonic system, we have intellectuals. And intellectuals are, Gramsci calls them the deputies of hegemony. And we have traditional intellectuals, we have organic intellectuals, right? Traditional intellectuals, the way of thinking about them is like status quo intellectuals. Administrators, what Gramsci says are, I'm sorry, the bio on Gramsci says are administrators and apologists for existing social and cultural institutions. In other words, the traditional intellectuals are the ones supporting, backing, even apologizing for the status quo, right? The things that have been in place for a long time. So if you think of like the Pope, right, or the president, or it doesn't even have to be that big. It can be like a lawyer, right, or a reverend, or something of that nature. Those would be traditional intellectuals, right? They're maintaining the status quo. Whereas organic intellectuals are like disruptors, innovators, and organizers. Um, they quote, bring to the level of public speech what has not been officially recognized in society. And the distinction to make here is that organic intellectuals they come from these socialized groups, right? They come from groups that exist in order for society to function, but they address what needs to be addressed that hasn't been addressed in society. So they're not, some people may hear that and they go, oh, they always must be good then, right? And that's not necessarily the case. They're just new. They're just fresh voices, right? So like two examples I put up here. The first one is Cesar Chavez, right? Cesar Chavez was an organizer, an activist for farm workers' rights, and he worked tirelessly throughout his life to ensure that farm workers, particularly in California, but across the United States, that their rights were maintained, and that they weren't treated as these, not only second class citizens, but sort of, really like in a state of neo slavery. Like they were paid horrible wages. They were given backbreaking work. And Cesar Chavez fought, with many other people, fought to change the way that farm workers in this country were treated. Um, to some success, but as we've seen recently with um, the West Coast fires and everything, like we still have a long way to go. But he would be an example of an organic intellectual. Another example of an organic intellectual would be somebody like Jeff Bezos, right? Where he saw a lack in this capitalist process of, well, I can streamline the way that people get products to themselves, um and I can cut out a lot of middle people, right, in order to do so. Um and that is something that will sort of speed up these capitalist processes, right? Now, is Jeff Bezos necessarily a wonderful human being? Well, he's a trillionaire, and people who work for him work essentially like live below the poverty level, a lot of them. So maybe not, right? But he is a disruptor, he's an innovator in that sense, right? And he comes along at a time when technology is rapidly changing, and so he does fill a lack, right, in the status quo. Doesn't necessarily mean he's doing the world a lot of favors by doing this, but here we are. um and then we have this notion of societal mediation and manufactured consent. Again, this creates in the average person living in a culture, living in a society, the illusion of choice, the illusion of choice. So, some of you may have heard, and this goes back to our research, that, Google is now fighting an antitrust suit that the Justice Department uh, filed against it, because if you think about how we obtain our info, let me backtrack a little bit. An antitrust suit, what it does is it essentially says that like a business is monopolizing the industry. It's making it so that other businesses in that industry um, are basically being like sucked dry, right? Like that they're not being utilized in favor of one overarching business. In this case, that overarching business would be Google. So Google is monopolizing the way that we get our information. And what this antitrust suit is saying is Google can't do that, right? Like Google has to create a more level playing field for these other competitors in the market to in which to engage. But should access to knowledge be part of a market? We have to think about that, right? Think about when I harp on all of you for using Googled sites, the reason why is because that knowledge is diluted, and it's not diluted with something wonderful like rose water. It's diluted with something closer to urine, right? Like it's not it's not knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's knowledge for the sake of making money. All those sites that people go to that are like, again, the URL is the same as the title, and it's a really easy, simplified understanding of concepts. So you want to use it in your essay. That is the dilution of knowledge. That is not rigorous knowledge. And if that is predicated on marketability, then that says something really dangerous about the knowledge that we are collecting, right? That that maybe we shouldn't be getting knowledge from a place that is built upon, market shares and making money and profit and all of these things. Maybe we should be getting knowledge from places like the library website that doesn't make money, right? That those sources, those scholarly journals that we're looking at are pursuing knowledge for that, for the love of knowledge. Just a thought, right? Um, but again, we think that we have options with Google because it, pulls up 50 billion hits or whatever, but we're still going to Google, right? We're still dependent upon that source to get our information. And that's problematic in so many ways, right? We think we have choice when we go to Amazon or to Target or to wherever else, but there are only a few of those. And what do those do to independent contractors, right? To the small mom and pop businesses? Well, they ruin them, right? They drive them out of business. And what do they do to workers? Well, again, like I said, they create hierarchies in which the people where there's the most people are working for the least amount of money, right? And are making, but the people at the top, like old Bezos here, is making the most money. And so it's the illusion of choice, right? It's like the Horatio Alger myth, right? We all think we're going to work really hard and become celebrities or like become billionaires or, create the new app and we're all going to be rich. But the reality of it is that we're not, right? We're going to work really hard. Like that's going to be the case. But the way that this society is set up in terms of hegemony, in terms of its intellectuals, its representatives, in terms of the manufactured consent we've engaged in to keep this society going, right? Um, the odds of that Horatio Alger story coming true has, gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to almost not, right? Anyway, digressing as usual. So what about school and education, right? I'm not off the hook, so let's talk about this. The purpose that Gramsci says, according to school and education, is to create intellectuals, whether they be organic or traditional, right? You can go to seminary school and be a priest, right? You could go to law school, be a lawyer. That's a traditional intellectual. You could go to school for, for who knows, teaching, and then revolutionize the way that teaching occurs and fight for workers' rights and become that kind of organic intellectual. So it's not to create a specific type of intellectual, but it is to create intellectuals. Well, schools under a capitalist society also create specialization. And think about your college experience, right? Are you attending college because you love knowledge, because you want to sit and you want to really riff intellectually on these ideas, or because you want to earn a degree so that you can get a good job and be part of this hegemonic system, right? So you can be a worker, a laborer. The odds are, and this is nothing wrong with you, right? This is the way that this system is set up and this is how we survive in it. But the odds are it's to be a specialized worker, right? A nurse or a teacher or an engineer or an accountant, right? And not just, and it's even more specialized than that right now. You know, it's a geriatric nurse, or it's a, you know, it's a CPA, it's a elementary school teacher, it's a college English professor, right? Like specialization. And then the other purpose for school and education is to assimilate, right? To make us like everybody else. And that happens, you know, from kindergarten on. Well, what's the problem? One problem that Gramsci points out is like, if there's so many of us specialized in these fields, then there's inevitably going to be unemployment when crises happen. I mean, anyone who's ever wanted to be a teacher, the first thing you'll find out is like, oh, there's an ebb and flow, right? When I first got my credentials, there were way too many teachers and there were more layoffs than there had ever been in history in 2011 when I wanted to teach high school. Then when I got my job at Fullerton, I was right at the end of a huge hiring boom, right? So, but because there's so many people in a specialized field, there are those in crisis, there are those moments of unemployment, right? And again, there's perceived spontaneous consent through mediation, but that mediation is influenced by power. It always first and foremost serves the power structure. And when it serves the people who have less power, it's only because it's serving the power structure and they just happen to benefit. But there's also state coercive power in moments of crisis when spontaneous consent doesn't work. Sounds a little like Althusser, right? Like we have the ideological state apparatuses and we have the repressive state apparatuses, apparati. The only difference is Gramsci came first, and Gramsci's version is a little more dynamic, right? There's not these delineated sort of like this, and that, and you can never get out of it the way that Althusser talks about. There's a little more complexity and wiggle room. And now, right? What about now? Because Gramsci's writing almost 100 years ago. So what about now? So many technological changes, so many changes in the world and in society have happened. You know, again, like I said, Gramsci was on the eve of and lived through fascist Italy, right? A time when you had fascism in, you know, Italy, in Germany, in Spain, in places in Asia, right? And now we have fascism in Brazil, China, the Philippines, North Korea, Russia, the United States, and anyone who wants to debate me on that, I'm happy to. You know, we have these fascist capitalist movements happening all over the world. So these, even though Gramsci's 100 years ago, a lot of this is very relevant. And one of the things he says about fascism is that people support it. You know, when people hear the word fascism, they think that they automatically assume that it didn't work for anybody, right? But one of the reasons that the Holocaust happened is because Hitler was able to convince enough non-Jewish Germans that it would be in their best interest to go along with these laws, right? Jews were not killed en masse illegally. This was a legal act in the state, right, the nation of Germany at the time. And so when we think about that, you know, people think, well, we're not a fascist country. We're not fascist because I'm living just fine, right? Like things kind of are crummy right now and we have COVID and all that stuff, but we're not a fascist country. And you have to think about the number of Germans in Germany who said the same thing. Well, I'm doing okay, right? Well, yeah, the economy's not great, but I'm doing fine. I don't know what happened to all my Jewish neighbors, right? But I'm doing okay, right? Fascism, it's not that it doesn't work for everyone, but it's that when it does involve its repressive state apparatus, they are severe, right? And it has far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. Anyway, um, so now, right, the category of intellectuals has undergone an unprecedented expansion, justified by the political necessities of the dominant fundamental group. Okay. So there are more intellectuals now than ever, right? More representatives, more cults of personality, more people standing up, good or bad, right? But it's an outgrowth of the political necessities of the dominant fundamental group. Okay? So the problem here, right, is that under capitalism, that means competition. That means there are more people competing now for uh, these places, either as intellectuals or just as workers than ever before, right? And I don't know why, but this made me think of a few years ago when they're when the move to raise the minimum wage to $15, even though we'd already like surpassed 15 as the minimum wage, the living wage for a person anyway. That's another discussion for another day. There was this meme where it was like an EMT, and the EMT was like, well, I make $15 an hour, so why should somebody working at McDonald's make $15 an hour? And the problem with that is that EMT is not looking at the actual power structure in place, right? If the EMT were to look at the people in power who make millions and billions of dollars while the rest of us, suffer at this very low level, that $15 between the EMT and the McDonald's worker is this compared to the difference between, the people who have the most power and us. And so instead of critiquing the other, instead of critiquing other workers in our society in these specialized positions, right, we should be critiquing those for whom society operates to benefit the most, right? What does it what does it matter if I'm making 14 a I was going to say a chimney sweeper, but no one sweeps chimneys anymore. If I make $15 an hour and a sanitation worker makes 16, why would I be mad at the sanitation worker when there's Jeff Bezos who's worth $1 trillion? Why am I not, right, questioning that a little more thoroughly? It's because of competition. What Gramsci would say, it's because we are taught to compete here, right, at this level. We're not taught to question a lot of that. And so when those intellectuals are injected into this, do they critique this or do they critique this? Well, what Gramsci says is that the traditional ones are going to keep us critiquing amongst ourselves. The organic ones are more likely to critique this way. Not always, right, but more likely. So keep that in mind. And then finally, we have to think about this in relation to the novel Eva Luna, right? So thinking about Rolf Carlé, right? Rolf Carlé's father, how might he reflect notions of hegemony that exist in his country of origin? And again, the country in which the novel takes place is a fictionalized Latin American country. But what do we see about notions of hegemony in that country? And where do we see it at work? And then finally, are there any traditional or organic intellectuals who have emerged yet within the novel? if there are, describe them and the cultural values or mores that they uphold or they challenge, right? All right, so I hope that helped. I got a little soapbox king here on this video, but hey, what else is new? Again, as questions or comments arise, please feel free to email me, to come to my Zoom office hours. And I hope some of this is doing something for you. All right, well, I hope you have a great rest of your day and evening.